Gallup is out with a new poll, and there are some interesting findings. It appears that Democratic voters want their party to tone things down. 45% of those polled said they would like to see Democrats become more moderate. Compare this to 2021, where only 34% voiced that sentiment. Only 22% right now say they would like to see the Democratic Party stay the same, and 29% want it to be more liberal.
Meanwhile, things are a little different on the Republican side. 43% of Republican voters who were polled would rather see the party stay the same. About 27% think the party should become more moderate, and 28% think it should be more conservative. As Gallup writes in their report, for now, Republicans overwhelmingly approve of Trump and are more satisfied with their party's current ideological bent than Democrats are with theirs.
As for Democrats, Gallup writes, the current sentiment may very well be a reaction to their losses in 2024 as they look ahead to 2026. So, curious poll findings here. Apparently measuring Democratic voter sentiment wanting a move to the centre. Now, I wonder what that means in specific terms. I do think that those numbers point to a problem of branding or political positioning for the Democratic Party, because my instinctive reaction to that poll and to those findings is the idea that people feel the Democratic Party has perhaps wandered too far to the left on what we might call identity politics or wokeness or things of that nature. I am more skeptical that they think that the Democratic Party has gone too far to the left on economic matters. And I say that because we know that there's a good deal of resentment and anger in this country about people feeling their economic positions are stagnating or falling backward. And I think you could argue that the Democratic Party has not captured that sentiment, has not been a vehicle for that sentiment. So my perception is what they're talking about is moderating from some of the quote-unquote woke stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there was a sense that they got beat partially because of the wokeness, the identity politics factor. This reminds me a little bit of 1968, Richard Nixon versus Hubert Humphrey, a very close election. But the Democrats lost, and they had a choice to make after it was all over. They could have either continued with the establishment, represented by Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, or they could move over with the activists, who were represented by the anti-Vietnam War crowd. They decided to go with the activists. And after that, from 1972 on, basically with a pause for Jimmy Carter's win, but on till mostly 1988, the Democrats lost every election in landslides. What they need to avoid doing if they want to win and can win in the future and win the House back in 2026 is they need to make sure that they're not alienating voters with those liberal policy ideas. I do notice, like you said, that the Democrats in almost every interview they give, they find some way to mention the billionaires, right? The 600 billionaires in their class that are apparently ruining the economy. That could work for them. I think class warfare and class resentment is a tool that has worked for the Democrats in the past. But if they do start to dwell on that identity politics, if they start to dwell on here's why the gays should be aggrieved, here's why the African Americans should be aggrieved, that's not going to serve them well.
I agree broadly. I think that, and I've made this point before, I'm not sure that it is quite right to just regard this as a level playing field in which Democrats decide to talk about the quote-unquote woke issues. That does happen in some parts of the progressive base, I would agree. But I have made the point on this show, in fact, before, that I have never ever heard a TV interview, for example, with a Democrat who, when asked about, let's say, the minimum wage, if they ever are, or the provision of health care, if they're ever asked about that, or the economy, when they are asked about that, pivot to talk about personal pronouns or trans people in sport or anything like that. There is a conservative-leaning media machine, both in terms of traditional media and in terms of social media, that constantly harps on those topics. And then when Democrats mention those topics in response to being asked about them, it's like, well, you're always harping on the trans issue or whatever.
You're right. Conservative media does focus on that quite a bit, but there is a difference between the professional Democrats, the professional class, of the left, and the activist class. And a lot of the times what we see out in the streets, some of the things that get the most attention are the activist class, the people we saw in the streets for Occupy Wall Street, the people we saw in the streets for Black Lives Matter and that movement. That's what a lot of people see and associate with the left, even if they're not, because, let's face it, moderates and a lot of conservatives don't necessarily see the economic talk that's going on the left. They kind of have blinders onto it. But again, I think that's something they really need to crack down on, and they especially during their primary season, which comes up in 2028, they need to ensure that they're not overtaken, I think, by the Bernie Sanders style candidates. Now, I don't know how you feel about Bernie Sanders, but I do believe that, yes, on the surface, some of his policies are popular with moderates, popular with independents. Once they figure out what they entail, though, they don't like them as much. For example, if you talk about universal health care, single-payer health care, and you say, oh, everybody gets health care and the government is the insurance to make the payments. They like that idea, but then they hear, oh, by the way, you're going to have to lose your private insurance if you have it, and they completely turn themselves off to that.
Maybe. I mean, I think that argument is one that could be made more effectively, and I think there is actually a greater degree of popularity for the concept of universal healthcare than people sometimes credit there as being. To my mind, it is ludicrous that the United States, the richest country in, as Sanders would say, the history of the world, doesn't have universal health care for people. This is a battle that was won in Britain for the National Health Service in 1947 or 48. A socialist by the name of Aaron Bevan set up the NHS in Britain, and it's regarded as one of the great achievements of British domestic politics. The fact that the United States has never got to that point does strike me as rather bizarre. But I just wanted to briefly, Dan, get back to another point you make about how these things are talked about. The comedian Bill Burr was on, I think it was a podcast earlier this week, where he was excoriating billionaires and essentially saying they were to blame for lots of things and that it was a disgrace for people to be working, having to work two jobs in order to pay the rent. And he was really having a go at that billionaire class. And there was a whole lefty debate on Twitter about the fact that that view actually does connect with what a lot of people are feeling. But there's a sort of consultant class in the Democratic Party for whom that's too business unfriendly or too uncouth or something. And so that in itself prohibits someone like Burr becoming like a liberal or lefty Joe Rogan, which is something that the left has talked about a lot recently.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the attacks on billionaires work quite well. There are not many people out there who say a billionaire and say, oh, they need their taxes cut. Even myself, I'm not a big advocate for taxing the billionaires less. That being said, I think they're hiding what they really want to say, which is, let's tax people who are making over $400,000 a year more. They always put it in the context of millionaires and billionaires, and that's not good economic policy to tax those people more, because those are the people who are the business owners in this country. I wish we'd be more honest about economics instead of just attempting to make people feel bad about other people and making them envious of other people. I think that's a big problem. But that being said, look, I think that the class warfare is one thing, but the identity politics is something that they really need to get a hold of. And it's not just that the politicians are talking about it. I don't think you'd see Kamala Harris go out there during the campaign and she wasn't talking about LGBTQ people all the time. She wasn't talking about African Americans all the time. But it was associated with her. It was associated with her from things that we understand the Democratic Party to deeply believe in, and the fact that they're made up of all of these special interest groups. And if you've ever been to a liberal progressive rally, it's not usually a rally about one thing. It's a rally about several different things, all those different identity politics issues. And when people see that, they say, wait, I know some of the things the Democrats believe in and I like them, but that's just too wild for me. You saw this with Bud Light too, right? Bud Light in the Dylan Mulvaney episode, that really hits people hard. People do not like that. And they feel like they're being preached to.
Well, I will give you the last word on that. It is a conversation that will go on for some time to come. In any event, up next, we'll talk about the beef between the Trump administration and the Associated Press. Stay with us.